I'll be recording, so make sure you remember. This cup is pretty much ready for a footing. In order to make a footing, I need several different supplies. I need a needle tool. First thing I'm going to do is just smooth this out a bit. I like to use my hands to finish smoothing because the hands just do such a nice job of getting rid of any of that extra texture or any of those little imperfections. Now my bottom is pretty much ready. I had a little air pocket here. I'm going to try to fill it in. My footing usually goes pretty close to the edges of the cup. The way I'm going to make it is I'm going to roll out a coil. So I'm taking some extra clay, and on my work desk, I'm going to roll that out. I do not want your footing to be extra tall, so a good idea is to kind of squeeze that clay and kind of thin it out before you start rolling it. You're learning a new term here, coil. Coils are a long, slender, rolled out piece of clay. There's many different ways to make coils. For today, you are going to make your coil on your desk. You'll use your hands to roll it out, similar to Play-Doh when you were young. Right now, my clay is very thick. It's too thick. We're going for about 1/4 of an inch. I like to compare measurements to the ruler and give you a guide for understanding about how thick it should be. When you roll it out, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be super smooth. It's going to be kind of rough. Okay, I have a decent size here. I'm going to end up trimming it just a bit. Let me bring my cup closer. So for this, I need a needle tool and I need slip. In my slip container, I have really wet clay. It's going to have extra amounts of water, and when I go to touch it, it's really goopy and somewhat similar to the way glue looks, but a little bit more clumpy, okay? All right, another thing that you're going to be doing when you work with this is using a paddle. So the first thing I need to do before I add my coil or my footing to the bottom is I need to make sure that my clay is going to stick. I'm adding a new piece of clay to the bottom, and if I want to just set my new piece of clay on here, after it's fired or even before then, it's going to pop right off. In order to get your clay to stick together, you're going to use the form of a ceramic form of glue, and that's what we're calling slip. So slip is just clay that's been watered down, okay? So in order for this piece of clay to stick, I am going to score the edges of the cup where my footing's going to go and on my coil. Now I'm doing a pretty rough drop here. When you're working, you go a little bit slower. I'm going to spin my banding wheel, and I am just going to kind of roughly scratch the surface, or in other terms, score it. And I'm preparing the surface for my coil. Now when I'm ready to add my coil, I'm going to try it for size. Okay? As I am moving around the cup, I can see my coil's too big, which is always better. So I'm going to actually cut off a piece of my coil. And I actually cut the cup too. I'm going to fix that. Don't do that. Okay, I cut a piece of my coil. Now I'm going to match up the other end without cutting the cup this time. And now these two ends are going to meet together. I'm ready to add this. Now I'm flipping it over and I'm going to score my coil as well. Again, this is my footing. It is rounded and not perfect yet. Lots of other details to be added. Now that little seam where those two pieces meet, I'm also going to score and slip that area as well. Now I'm going to remove this and I'm just going to dig my finger in and I'm getting some slip. Some people like to use paintbrushes to apply the slip. It doesn't matter really to me if you use your finger or a paintbrush. Either way, you're getting the kind of consistency for it to be a little bit watery, a little bit solid. So you've got kind of a texture that you're putting on there with some of that slip. I like to also add slip to the area that I'm applying, so I'm putting it on my coil as well. So this process of slip and score is an important one for you guys to understand exactly what you need to know when you're adding pieces of clay. You also have a fresh piece of clay and your clay on your cup is actually hardened a bit. So they're dried at different amounts. So that means that when you go to add this, that one is going to want to dry faster than the other. So that's important that you kind of know you're applying two different kinds of clay. One that is a little bit closer to leather hard, and at this stage, the other one which is more in the plasticity stage. Why do you need to know that? And why is it okay for me to add really wet clay on top of really wet clay without slip and score? This piece is more wet than my cup. Because this piece is more wet than my cup, I absolutely have to slip and score, or that piece will not stick together. If I was using two pieces, joining two pieces of clay, which are both at the same level of plasticity, then you don't really have to worry about it as much. Okay, now I have added my footing. Now I'm going to take my paddle and tap the surface, flatten it out a bit. This is also getting rid of any air pockets. And I can see kind of what areas need to be adjusted. Okay, so now I've flattened it out with my paddle. Now I'm ready to do some trimming. Trimming is an important term for you to understand. When I trim, I need to make sure my cup is nicely centered on here. Now I'm going to take my needle tool. I'm going to rest my arm on my table to keep it stable, and I'm going to start trimming my footing. When you're trimming your footing, you are kind of perfecting the edges. If I leave it just like this, those edges are very organic, uneven, and kind of messy. So what I'm doing with my needle tool is I'm going to real slowly spin my banding wheel and kind of draw a little line to show me where the edges should be. And as I spin, it's creating an opening and tearing off the areas that I don't need. So what happens here is you're going to see where your edges are, some of them were really close to the edge of the cup and some of them were a little bit farther away, which is why you see some areas you're taking off more than others. You guys are at the beginning stage of ceramics. Don't worry too much about the particulars. What I want you guys to do is try to clean it up as best you can. So now I'm going to pull off those little extra pieces of clay. Use that needle tool to kind of pull it away if you're having a hard time. I'm also taking the needle tool and kind of scoring the underside to help it pull off. Now I'm pulling little ribbons of clay off. And this is starting to give me a nice clean edge. Lots of finishing details need to happen still. All right, so now the inside of my footing is gonna need to be adjusted. This is a little bit harder because you're working on the inside. Again, I'm resting my hand on my table. Some areas are already pretty thin. You guys see that little edge that I made myself? This is probably one of the trickier parts of doing a mug, giving it a footing. My advice is to work slow. Just don't try to spin your banding wheel real fast and do this quickly. That's not going to work well for you. All right, so now I have separated that layer so I can kind of pull it off from the bottom. So I'm going in from the side and I'm gonna detach it. If it's not detached yet, then just keep cutting. Okay. Now I'm gonna clean this up with my fingers. I'm just gonna take my finger on the inside. I'm gonna spin my banding wheel. I have a little bit of slip on my finger to help fill in any little holes there. If you accidentally cut any holes there, that's very typical and not a problem, easy to fix. One of the things that I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna go ahead and tap to further push down any imperfections and kind of finish off that area. And now I'm gonna go on the outside with my finger and clean that up as well. And I can see this little edge right here needs some love, so I'm gonna go ahead and just use my needle tool and pull some of that extra clay off. Use your tools to your advantage. Your tools can help you make this look really nice and neat. Pulled off a little too much there, but that's okay, I can fix it. If you accidentally pull off too much like I did right there, I'm just gonna kind of tap in another piece of clay. Go over with a little slip and then recut it off. And now I'm going to spend my time kind of using some other tools to clean up these edges. So I have another tool to use. It's called a ribbon tool. I'll be right back. All right, so my ribbon tool, this is a small ribbon tool here, and it has a triangular edge to it, giving you a nice 90-degree angle, and it also gives you a 30-degree angle. I guess I shouldn't call that 90-degree angle. So, all right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take this ribbon tool and I'm gonna use it to help me shape my edges. The reason it's called a ribbon tool is because when you spin the banding wheel, it pulls ribbons of clay off. You have to be very careful. I'm not pushing down on this, so it's just very lightly being dragged across the surface, so to speak. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of cleaning up my edges using this. And I'm not putting any pressure on it whatsoever, but just really slowly allowing it to take off any extra clay that needs to go. Okay. Now I have a pretty good footing. I'm going to clean it up a little bit more, but that is the main process that I want you guys to understand, so that when you are adding your footing, you can make it nice and neat. Mine is pretty tall, but I like my footing to be tall. If you feel like your footing is unnatural, take your paddle, tap it down, and then you can reshape it, okay?
Well, I'm not pouring water into mine, I'm just putting them. I tried to stop you, you're like, what are you doing? Look at it.